All right, from one native Chicagoan and Sam Cooke to another, and our friend Mariam. We're going to start in just a second. Let me get the slides up. How does that look, Mariam? Can you see those slides?
Looks great.
Great. All right. Welcome, everyone, to Bonfire number 3 tonight. We are going to be talking about how to know yourself. I am excited to be joined by one of last year's fellows, a builder, a Chicago native. Mariam, welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be co-hosting this bonfire tonight on how to know yourself, and I can't wait to talk to you all in the bonfire and on the chat. So let's get into it.
Great. So if you haven't already, remember, we are chatting in the Bonfire Slack. If you have questions, put them in the Q&A in the Zoom webinar, and make sure to upvote questions that you'd like from others, because we're going to get to those at the end of tonight's bonfire. With that, let's dig in. All right. We're going to start with a rapid fire round, and this doesn't necessarily have to do with the lesson, but I thought I would pose this question to you because it's been exactly a year since many of us realized how serious COVID was going to be, and many places went into lockdowns. It was actually 1 year ago tonight that I did a bonfire for CU. It was, I believe, week 4, week 5. And after I did the bonfire, I spoke with someone who worked in the same building in New York City. And he asked me if I had enough groceries to last the next couple of weeks. And I was kind of confused. So why would that be? And he said, probably wouldn't be able to go out for a couple of weeks. And I thought he was crazy to say even a couple of weeks we would not be able to go out for. And it really didn't hit me till the next day, until I started seeing more about the lockdowns in Italy and the problems that they were having over there, that I realized that, well, we're no different than Italy. This meant that something like that would probably happen in the US too. So that was my moment. My question for you is, when did you realize that COVID was going to change how we live? And Mariam, you can feel free to say when you realized it also, as we see these responses.
For sure. Like a lot of people are starting to put in the chat, mine is March 13th, the last day of school before we got off for a couple of weeks, and everyone was super excited for a long spring break, but we quickly realized that was not what it was going to be for a while. But yeah. Oh, I'm seeing some people starting even later in April. It's kind of crazy, but yeah.
Yeah, I see when Tom Hanks got it. Yeah, when the NBA shut down or when March Madness was canceled. Yep, those were big ones for me too.
Yeah, the statewide curfews are big ones too.
Yep, school cancellations. Oh, Dariel, CUDC, RIP. When there's no toilet paper, yeah, that was crazy for a while, that it was hard to get toilet paper. It's hard to think back to that. Over the summer for some people, when the death toll started increasing. When I started to wake up at 3 p.m. instead of 6 a.m. for school. That's funny. No, thank you for these responses. I mean, I know, it's obviously a very serious topic. 500,000 Americans passed away, hundreds of thousands also are around the globe. And so if anyone, I'm sure lots of you have been personally touched and affected by this. And so these are going to be grim anniversaries coming up. But hopefully, if you have experienced a loss due to it, that we at CU can provide some kind of comfort and something to look forward to on Monday nights. And so with that, we will get started with the lesson. Thank you for all your answers.
All right, so jumping into today's agenda, we're going to start off by talking about why leaders are essential to changing systems. Then we're going to talk about what defines a CU leader, which we like to call civic superheroes, and we'll definitely get more into that tonight. Then we'll talk about what a civic superhero needs to know about themselves. And like always, we'll do a Q&A session and then go into breakout hangouts so that you all can talk with each other after the bonfire is over.
All right. So the reason that you're here is a lot of you want to shift some big system that's entrenched and hasn't changed for a while. That could be our justice system. That could be the way we deal with climate change. That could be our electoral system. That could be something international, the way that countries interact with each other, war, etc. And in order to do that, you're going to need all of the following. You need a good reason. You need a why you're doing this. You're going to need to bring a team together. It's really hard to do this kind of work on your own. You're going to need a strategy. You need some planning that's involved. You're going to need resources. People need food, clothing, shelter to live, and so you're going to need to provide money to pay for those things for your team. And then you need a little bit of luck as well. And so throughout the fellowship, we're going to be talking about how you can acquire all of these things and build these things if you want to shift an entrenched system.
So today we're going to focus on one core component of any effort to make positive change, which is the leaders, aka all of you. And if we were to guess, probably all of you already have some form of a leadership role, or at least want to take a leadership role in the near or distant future. But do we all have the same definition of what a leader is?
Probably not. You probably all have different definitions of what a leader is. And some of you probably have a specific image that comes to mind when you hear the word leader. And maybe some of you were thinking about a civil rights leader, someone like Nelson Mandela, or maybe a business person or a philanthropist like Bill Gates, or maybe it was a young person that's leading a fight against climate change like Greta. Or maybe you're thinking of a religious leader or someone who has devoted their life to helping the poor and the destitute, like Mother Teresa.
All right, so that brings us to our rapid response round. So take a minute to think of who comes to your mind when you think of a leader and why they are an effective leader, and then respond in the Bonfire Slack channel.
So who comes to your mind when you think of a leader?
Mr. Beast, because he's using all his money to help people. Your Girl Scout troop leader, she taught me how to grow as a young woman. Awesome. Dwayne Johnson, he's definitely been involved with CU, so that's awesome.
Gary's gonna like that answer.
Think of Gary Shang and the rest of the CU team. Okay, Darielle, very nice, very nice. I see a couple Emma Watsons in here, which is really cool. I see the Obamas a couple of times. Me and Nick, thank you. I see RBG, AOC, amazing. George Washington, ooh, Angela Davis. These are all great ones.
Dolly Parton, that's a cool one there. I saw some people put their mom, which is great.
For sure. See John Lewis, that's awesome. Andrew Yang, another favorite of Gary's.
Oh, Shirley Chisholm, nice. First Black woman to run for president. Love Shirley. She's also from New York, represents the same district that the CU office is in.
Sure. See Toni Morrison, Marsha P. Johnson. These are all great answers.
Angela Davis, Toni Morrison. Yeah, these are really good. Clark Kent, fictional. Ooh, Jackie Robinson. We're going to talk about him later. Good one, Brendan.
State senators. Jane Fonda.
Fonda.
Ooh. Nice. Ooh, I see a lot of upvotes for Zendaya. She's definitely an icon, I feel like, for our generation too, so I love that. I got
Darielle, get out of here, Darielle.
Audre Lorde, love that. Oh, I see another Stacey Abrams.
Socrates. These are all so good. I love it. All right, we will move on, but thank you for for doing that. As you can imagine, we're not trying to tell you who is and who isn't a leader. We love the suggestions that you made, and you should definitely look up to those people. And what we're going to try to do is craft a list of the most important characteristics of a leader along with you, so that when we talk about leadership during the fellowship, we're all on the same page.
All right, so time for another rapid response round. So take a minute to think of what you think the most important characteristic of a leader is, and then make sure to include your why. Then put your answers in the Slack channel, and we can start taking a look at them. Oh, communication, first one, definitely. Empathy is huge, love that. Compassion, for sure. Open-minded, definitely.
Lots of empathies. Keep saying that. That's a great one. Vision. I like that. Flexibility, not corrupt. Compassion and initiative. I like that.
Compromise. I've seen a couple of times, definitely. Ooh, charisma. That's interesting.
Gary throwing jokes in the chat. Nice
Yeah,
job.
I don't know how I feel about the bicep situation. That's definitely something. Vision, interesting. Pragmatic. It's good too. Yeah, these are all great qualities, super important to have in leaders.
Great. I keep seeing someone saying that they can't see the slides, but I think, Mariam, you can see them fine, right?
I definitely can. Would you all mind like putting in the chat if you can see the slides just so we can double check? Okay, perfect. People
Yes.
are
Okay. All right. So it might be a problem on your end. I apologize for that. All right. Okay. So what do we think is the most important characteristic of a leader? We took all of your thoughts, which were fantastic, and I think collectively we kind of could come up with a pretty good list there. But I'm going to propose one characteristic that I don't think I saw mentioned on there, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't, because the chat does move so fast. And this answer comes to us from a friend of Civics Unplugged. She's the CEO of the Youth Activism Project, Anika Manzoor, who's also a former Unplugged Convo guest. And she suggested in that Unplugged Convo, and we agree, that vulnerability is actually a very, very important, if not the most important characteristic of an essential leader. And I'll explain why. So think about the leaders of any social change movement. So it could be the civil rights movement in the 60s, or more recently, maybe the Me Too movement. The first people to lead these movements had to show extreme vulnerability, to put themselves out there, to be those first people, to draw attention to their cause and start the process of change. So you can think of people like Rosa Parks. Was she vulnerable when she sat in the whites only section of a bus? Of course she was. Were the thousands of women, especially the initial women who shared their stories of harassment during Me Too, vulnerable? Of course they were. They were risking it all to tell those stories. So yes, these acts were also incredibly courageous. So some of you could argue that it's more courage that's an essential leadership quality, which courage is definitely important. But we're arguing that vulnerability was actually the necessary condition to make that happen. I mean, there's been some scholarship on this topic as well. And so if you're interested in more of this, you can check out the work of a Harvard professor named Marshall Gans, who talks about this role of vulnerability in leadership.
All right, so how does this apply to you all as leaders? And before I get into this, I do want to mention that you might think that you are only the leader of an after-school club or sports team or a small nonprofit. And I thought the same way too when I started getting small leadership positions, like at my school, leading clubs. And I didn't really think that the characteristics of leadership were super important in like trivial positions or what I believed were trivial positions. But we are here to tell you that that is not the case. And even in these positions that you're in right now, displaying vulnerability to your team members will go such a long way to earning their respect, as well as loyalty to your shared mission, which is also super important. So even if you don't consider yourself a leader yet, don't worry, because we're here for you. And that's exactly what this fellowship is for. And start to consider how these leadership characteristics can apply to you in whatever leadership position you occupy right now, or hopefully in the future as well. All right, so the goal of CU is to help all of you transform into civic superheroes, which are people who practice leadership through service. And you'll hear us referring back to the term civic superheroes a lot. And that is what all of you are, people who practice leadership through service.
Great. And at this point, we want to share that civic superheroes come in all different shapes and forms. There's no one archetype of a civic superhero. So all of these icons represent an example of that. So we'll start from the top left, the microphone there. A journalist, right, who does real hard investigative journalism is a civic superhero. It's often called the fourth branch of government or the fourth estate, right? To make sure that our elected leaders are doing their jobs. Or you could be an elected leader yourself. That's the pen there, right? If you're writing bills that are bettering America and furthering democracy, then you're definitely a civic superhero. You could be someone who works with your mind, maybe as a software engineer, like our co-founder Gary, who's a former software engineer at Google. Or maybe you're someone like me who's a teacher. That's the teacher icon there in the top right. Teachers are definitely civic superheroes, especially the ones that are working extra hard to educate the next generation of citizens. Bottom left, you have a family, right? Some of you mentioned that the leaders that you see were your parents, and that's definitely true. Raising a family that's civically engaged, those are civic superheroes. Or you could be amplifying the voices of others, right? If you're an activist who is giving a voice to the voiceless, definitely a civic superhero. Maybe you are someone who is a YouTuber who educates people on their YouTube channel. You could definitely be a civic superhero that way. And then finally, maybe you're fortunate enough to have accumulated lots of wealth, and you're using that wealth to donate to organizations that are making a difference. So being a philanthropist, you can also be a civic superhero. And so because so many people with different complementary superpowers all need to contribute to efforts to make change happen, systems change, which we're trying to do here, necessarily demands leaders who don't fit any one particular profile. So we're going to need people in all of those categories and many more. At this point, hopefully you should feel empowered by this. There's no one archetype that you need to be a civic superhero. And so it's going to be up to you to figure out where the U-shaped hole in the world is that you can fill.
All right, so how do you know when you found said U-shaped hole? So some of the things that you can definitely look to are when you find a role that lets you integrate many of your passions, actualize your core values or virtues, leverage many of your signature skills and strengths, and of course, actually shift systems or solve problems that you care about. As you can see, we've highlighted some of the really important things, and you might recognize them from some of the leadership blueprint quests that you've been completing. So hopefully you can start to think about how this also applies to you as a leader. When a role allows you to check all the boxes, that's when you've known you found a sweet spot. And that sweet spot is a U-shaped hole that you may want to step into as your role as leader.
All right, so somebody mentioned Jackie Robinson earlier when we were talking about examples of leaders, and just wanted to highlight this. This is also a shout out to our co-founder, Josh, who actually worked at the Jackie Robinson Foundation and is very close with Jackie's wife, Miss Rachel Robinson. So Jackie used to have a famous saying that life isn't a spectator sport. Now, what does that mean? It means that you can't just sit on the sidelines and expect for your circumstances to change, right? You need to go out there and do it. And there are multiple ways at any given point for you to do good for yourself and for the world. but you're not going to get those opportunities. And you don't know which opportunities to look for unless you put in the actual work to know yourself and grow yourself. Now you might be asking, well, what does knowing myself even mean? I know myself, like I'm with myself 24/7. There's a saying that goes, wherever you go, there you are. So it might seem easy to know yourself. And maybe you've heard of this concept before. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato said to knowing thyself, instead of myself, he used the phrase thyself. He said that knowing yourself was the single most important thing you could do in your life. That was really the purpose of humanity. If by the end of your life, you didn't truly know who you were, you didn't put that work in to understand that, then you essentially failed as a human. And so this is not something that is frivolous. And I really think that you're going to benefit by trying to know yourself better. And key point, no one knows you better than yourself. You can definitely solicit the opinions of others with this. They can sometimes see blind spots, but no one is going to be able to figure out you better than you. All right, why do you need to know yourself though, if you're not convinced yet? And it's because knowing yourself is foundational to being able to develop yourself. And that is essential to becoming a civic superhero.
So this brings us to another rapid response round. So take a minute to think of what do you think is important to know about yourself, and then put it in the Bonfire Slack channel.
Core values, great. Goals, habits.
See a lot of weaknesses.
Weaknesses, good.
Ooh, your boundaries, definitely. Vulnerabilities, of course, tying into what we were just talking about. Priorities, your insecurities, for sure. Your limitations.
Passions.
Oh yeah, for sure.
How you handle stressful situations, that was great. Your morals.
Ooh, how to ground yourself. Nice.
Your hobbies, likes and dislikes, your own biases. Yes, trying to understand your own biases, so important.
For sure. Your motivations, also really important. Oh, the things you can or can't change, super important.
What you would fight for. Amount of power you have. Your blind spots, super important.
What makes you tick, for sure. Your potential to change things and my limits to how I can't. Definitely love that, Carmen.
Great. All right. So, as you can imagine, there's no right answer to this question, but we at CU do have a perspective on what you ought to know. And so here are just 7 things that we think you should know. And you've probably heard us talking about these before because, surprise, they're part of the leadership blueprint. We think, like many of you said, you should know what you value, you should know your virtues, right? Someone said morals. Yeah, these are all fall under the same category. These are your deeply held beliefs that are so deeply held that they don't get changed very easily. That it would take a lot to change those. Only if an incredible amount of evidence presented itself would you change those, and maybe even then you wouldn't. Second, your passions, right? What you really like doing, your strengths, what you're good at doing, your lifestyle. You need to be honest about that in order to change it. And we have a lesson that's actually devoted to how to manage your time. Your influences. We have a lesson around that as well. The identity roles that you play, and then the growth areas where you want to get better and where you can get better. And so, like I said, we're putting these in your leadership blueprint for a reason. By mapping out these essential parts of yourself through the leadership blueprint, you'll more easily find your U-shaped hole in the world.
So we definitely have covered a lot. And so to recap, changing complex systems is really difficult, but it is possible with collective action. And collective action depends on the existence of civic superheroes like you working together. Civic superheroes definitely need to know themselves, including their values, their strengths, their passions, and all of the other things that you all mentioned in the Bonfire Slack. And they need to be true to themselves and intentionally grow themselves and their superpowers to contribute to the change that they want to see. So for your weekly quest, you will be completing a superpowers quest because understanding what you're good at is super important to making intentional decisions about how you want to grow yourself through your self-discovery sub-journey. And knowing your superpowers is super important to you as a civic superhero. And just as a reminder, these quests aren't for us to like grade or tell you what is right or wrong. It's not an assignment. These are just to help you map out yourself and more understand yourself a little bit better. And also, as a side note, no one will ever see these quests besides you. It's completely for yourself. I mean, no one at the CU team or like any of your Junto members will ever need to see these. So feel free to be as honest and deep as you would like to in these because it is just for you and completely personal.
Great point. Thank you for bringing up that privacy element. We at CU are not going to look at those leadership blueprints unless you ask us to or want us to. All right, recommendations. I have a couple of recommendations this week. The first one came from co-founder Gary. Thank you, Gary, for sharing this YouTube video. It's about Stoicism. It's about Stoic philosophy in a modern way. And as you watch this video, remember it's just one perspective on how to develop yourself, but it's kind of a good starting point about developing yourself. Ultimately, this whole unit that we're doing on personal development is something you're going to figure out for yourself, but you're going to take inspiration from many different sources. Second recommendation is a TV show that I started watching last week and have become obsessed with. It's on Apple TV Plus. It's called For All Mankind. It's a space show, so it kind of fits with the CU theme. It's historical fiction, which means that there's a lot of elements that are true, but a lot of it is fictionalized. It imagines that the Russians were actually the first people to get to the moon, beating the Americans. And that actually turned out to be a good thing for humanity because it forces the Americans to not give up on NASA after getting to the moon and explore it even more. And it's actually really important on a day like today, which is International Women's Day, because a large part of the story hinges on female astronauts playing a really big role and especially inspiring a younger generation of young women. So if you haven't seen it, I'm only about halfway through the first season. So check it out and maybe we can talk about it on a Slack channel or something if people are interested. I really like it. All right, a couple announcements. You can join us this Saturday, March 13th at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. This is to accommodate fellows who are ahead of us in time zones for this week's Hangout Cosmic Connections. Also, if you're interested in participating in a trek, or you even want to know what a trek is, if this is the first time you're hearing of it, check your email or check the announcements page in Slack and look for Madison's message. She is the point person for treks, and she has some cool info if you want to participate. And then last announcement / shout out is to CU's Berta. She was our co-host for Bonfire 1. She was featured today on Facebook's Instagram page, which I didn't even know was a thing, that Facebook had an Instagram page, but I guess because I'm old, I didn't realize that. They did a video about her and a few other women for International Women's Day. So check that out. The link is in these slides. And as always, I'll send these slides out at the end. All right, with that, we're going to do some Q&A. And if you'd like to stick around for a breakout hangout, Darielle will be posting a link in the Slack Bonfire channel right when we're done with Q&A. So we're going to hop in to the Q&A right now. And Mariam, you can fire away.
Sure. So feel free to put any of your questions in the Q&A box or in the Slack, and we'll definitely get to answer them. Not seeing any at the current moment in time, but hopefully that means that you all are just digesting and hopefully had a good time at the bonfire. Don't have any questions right now.
Yeah, put them in the Zoom if you have questions.
We have a question from Sarah. When you say vulnerability, do you mean the right situations to make change happen?
So I think that vulnerability is about being, in order to be a leader, you need to sometimes be the first mover on something to forge new territory. And in order to do that, it takes a lot of vulnerability because you might fail, right? And you might need to show some weakness if you fail, and that's not easy for a lot of people. And you're right though, V, that there needs to be the right situation sometimes to make that change happen. The Me Too movement, for example, there's been a great case study by Cass Sunstein about why it took so long for that to happen, right? There obviously had been harassment like that going on for a long time, but it wasn't until there was kind of like a tidal wave of people willing to get behind it that actually happened. So the right situation definitely is important there.
All right, and feel free to upvote the questions that you want to have answered. But we have a question that says, how can we encourage others to be vulnerable? And I think that's something that's super important, is making sure that the environment that they're in is a safe space and letting them know that they won't be judged for anything that they bring to the table, so that they are comfortable opening up about things that they might not have opened up before. But Nick, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think you need to just create the conditions where people feel safe to be vulnerable, and if they feel like they're not going to be heard or they're going to be punished, then they're not going to be vulnerable, right? So it's all about creating those conditions.
All right, what gives you the hope and courage to be a vulnerable leader? I think that's a great question because it definitely takes a lot of courage, like we're talking about, to be a vulnerable leader. But I think something that maybe necessarily like motivates you to be vulnerable is like seeing how your team responds to that and how it builds a sense of community, and how you really create an environment where other people feel vulnerable. I mean, something that gives me hope is seeing all of you in the bonfire chat, which is so cool that there are so many people on a Monday night just like here to learn about leadership and vulnerability, which is really cool. But yeah, what do you think, Nick?
I agree with that. I have nothing to add to that one.
Okay, see a question that says, how can we become effective leaders and show the courage to make change?
So no easy answers there, but I think the slides tonight, what we put together, is like a starting point for how we're going to become effective leaders and show the courage to make change. Always looking at past examples of that for inspiration. Like that's why we put in Jackie Robinson and a couple others that we can look to. And then look, there's going to be people who none of us have ever heard of, who are effective leaders and show that courage. And I think that's where you and your local communities can kind of find those people. And they might not ever be as famous, but they're still doing good work. And as we go through the fellowship, I think it'll become more clear, especially as you fill out more of the leadership blueprint, what it's going to take for you to be an effective leader, which is different than what it would take for me to be an effective leader, what it would take for Mariam to be an effective leader.
Definitely. I also see a question that says, what do you believe is the worst trait in a leader? And I don't necessarily think there is one single worst trait in a leader. But Nick, what do you think about this?
So actually, I think this is a good question. I think there's a lot of bad traits in leaders. Number one, it'd be hard to point at, maybe hubris. That's a big one. Lots of Greek tragedies written about that. Um, I mean, sometimes you could just go with the opposite of the good traits. Like, so if you're not empathetic, you're not compassionate, you don't show vulnerability, you're not flexible. I know that might seem like a cop out to be just using the opposite of those traits, but I think that works. So if I had to choose one, I would say hubris.
For sure. And a lot of people are putting in the chat what they think are bad traits, and a lot of people put greed, selfishness, cowardice. I think those are all great ones too.
Yeah. Oh, I see another one about terrible leaders. Why they get so much support. That's a great question. I mean, look, that's why historians study this stuff, right? To see why over time. Some of it is because people didn't have a choice. They were oppressed, right? And they had to show support for their leader, or else they would have been executed. And then other times they might have been fooled, right? All you need to do is look at late 1920s and 1930s Germany to see how lots of people weren't really aware of what was going on, or turned a blind eye to it, and until it was too late.
Definitely. Carmen asks, how important is knowledge of ourself in contrast with others' perception of us? And then parentheses, if others perceive myself as having a certain characteristic and I don't myself, which perception is most important in a leader? Seeing some philosophical elements here. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, this is a really good question, Carmen. So, you'll often hear that perception is reality sometimes, right? So even if you think you're being a good leader and being empathetic and showing vulnerability, if the other people around you and on your team don't feel that and don't believe that, then something is amiss, right? There's some kind of disconnect. And I think that's why open communication with your team is going to be really important. And maybe even allowing for some feedback. And if they tell you, for example, that they don't feel comfortable coming to you to talk about, say, like strengths and weaknesses, or sharing feedback, then that's a problem, right? You've obviously fostered an atmosphere where people are worried about that stuff. And so you might think up in your head that you've done this great job, but that perception is not matching the reality of it.
Seeing a question that we've been avoiding, which is, what is the meaning of life? I don't know how you all want us to answer this necessarily. If I had a good answer, I would probably be publishing it and not being here right now. But you know what, Nick, you can definitely take this one away and give your thoughts on
Yeah,
it.
I mean, I don't have an answer for that one. Innumerable amounts of books have been written about that, so you can go in any different direction. Tonight we talked a little bit about Greek philosophy and talking about Plato, thinking that it was all about knowing yourself. So that's one answer, but you could read any philosophers, and you're gonna find different responses. Unfortunately, it's a little bit beyond the scope of Mariam Murai's expertise for tonight.
For sure. And if any of you all have answers that you love for this question, feel free to put them in the chat and give your own responses. But yeah, so if anyone else has any other questions, feel free to put them in the Zoom Q&A. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually seeing some of the comments in the chat. The meaning of life is 42. I think Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy nod there. Meaning of life is different for everyone. I like that response, Hannah. Cool. All right, well, it doesn't look like there's any more questions, but I like the chat is going on. If you want to keep talking about this stuff, I think we posed some good questions. Then you can join the breakout hangout link that Darielle is going to post in a minute, or continue them in your Juntos. That's what the Juntos are for. Also, is to leave you space to have these conversations. So with that, we will sign off for tonight. Thank you so much, Mariam, for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me. I loved hosting this bonfire with you tonight. And thank you all for being such great Slack participants. I loved everything that you had to say. And hopefully I'll see you all soon.
All right, see y'all later.
Bye.
Bye.